Hi, this tutorial covers the range rule of thumb. So let's start with some data. 20 people exiting a movie theater were asked to rank the movie they just saw on a 0 to 10 scale. A rank of 0 meant the moviegoer extremely disliked the movie, and a rank of 10 meant the moviegoer extremely enjoyed the movie. Here's the data. Alright, so we had one person who ranked it a 3 out of 10. Next person ranked it a 2 out of 10. Okay, so if you look through the data, we had a 0 there, 10 here. It looks, in general, the scores, some good, some bad. All right, so to measure the center and spread of this distribution, let's consider the mean and the standard deviation. Okay, so I calculated these from the data. So the mean was 4.6 and the sample standard deviation was 2.68. Okay, so if we think about how these values are spread out, let's think about 4.6 being in the middle, and then let's think about some standard deviations both above and below the mean. Okay, so think of your standard deviation almost as like a unit of measurement. So standard deviation, all of these would both be 2.68 kind of ranking units away from this mean. So if we think about how far above the mean that would be, if we take 4.6 and add a standard deviation, we end up with 7.28. Okay, so one standard deviation above the mean is about 7.28. Now, one standard deviation below the mean, so if we subtract a standard deviation, we end up with 1.92. Okay, so if we mark this value, that would be 1.92. So basically, any ranking between 1.92 and 7.28 is going to be considered a typical rank. Okay, let's go now one more standard deviation above the mean. So trying to make that about 2.68 again, and we'll go another standard deviation below the mean. So again, this is 2.68. Okay, and let's determine now what these values are. Okay, so if we are now 2.68 units above 7.28, that's going to give me a value of about 9.96. Okay, and then if we do two standard deviations below the mean, so if we start with 1.92 and subtract 2.68, that's going to give us negative 0.97. Okay, so really, if we think about this whole span of values from negative 0.76 to 9.96, that covers about 4 standard deviations. Okay, so that right here is about 4 times your standard deviation. Okay, so that this whole range here. And just to calculate what that value is, 4 times 2.68 ends up being about 10.72. Okay, so now if we think about that, that's very close to the range of the values. Okay, so that brings in what's called the range rule of thumb. So the range of a data set can be estimated as 4 times the standard deviation. Or alternately, the standard deviation can be estimated as 1/4 of the range. Okay, so kind of putting these, putting the words here into formulas, the range is, now the squiggly equal sign is approximately. So range is approximately equal to 4 times the standard deviation. And then the standard deviation then is approximately equal to the range divided by 4. Okay, so let's check to see if these rules work on our data. So what we already calculated was 4 times the standard deviation. So that was about 10.72. Now if we think about our range, so our range now is the maximum minus the minimum. 10 minus a minimum of 0. So 10 minus 0, which is 10. Okay, so these two values are pretty close. Okay, obviously they're not exactly the same, but they are a good approximation of each other. Okay, now if we do this the other way, we know that our standard deviation is 2.68. Okay, now if we take our range divided by 4, that's going to be 10 divided by 4. If we divide those two numbers now, that should give me 2.5. These two values are now approximately equal, 2.68 and 2.5. So these are good way of estimating that too. So basically, most of the time, these two kind of rules will hold up. That 4 times the standard deviation is about the same as the range, and the standard deviation is about a fourth of the range. Generally, these estimations will work. They work the best with symmetric distributions. So if your distribution is symmetric, this range rule of thumb will work pretty well. But the range rule of thumb is inaccurate with large data sets. So we only had 20 values, but if you have maybe 100 values, chances are this range rule of thumb won't work as well. So this has been the tutorial on the range rule of thumb. Thanks for watching.